Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned for the Robert E. Howard Show. It's the Robert E. Howard Show once again. And today on the Robert E. Howard Show, we're going to be talking about two new books that have recently been published by the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press. Yes, our friends at the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press, who publish a bunch of great Robert E. Howard fiction and nonfiction. A lot of stuff that you can't find in the Great Del Rey edition of Robert E. Howard's work. The Great Del Rey edition, which published the definitive versions of Conan, Bran McMorn, Solomon Kane, Cull, and all those guys, and a bunch of other stuff besides. But there's a lot of stuff in the Del Rey set that, there's a lot of stuff missing. Because Robert E. Howard wrote a lot, man. He wrote a lot. And the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press is getting a lot of that stuff out into print and has been for years. And they've got a new publishing venture where they are reprinting a bunch of their older hardcover books in new hardcovers and new paperback editions. And they're just great. And they just came out with a couple new ones. One is this. This is Spicy Adventures. Spicy Adventures from Robert E. Howard, which has probably the most perfect cover that this book could possibly have. That cover is just excellent. And who did this? It was Wheatley, right? Am I remembering right? Mark Wheatley? Yes, Mark Wheatley did the cover for this volume as well as the other volumes in this series. And yeah, perfect cover for Spicy Adventures. And he also did the cover for this one. This is Pirate Adventures, Robert E. Howard Pirate Adventures, a collection of Robert E. Howard's pirate stories, which is pretty great. That's pretty great that they published this. I've been looking forward to this. So let's talk a little bit about these two books. We'll talk about Spicy Adventures first. It's pretty spicy stuff. So these stories were published in a paperback book. Was it back in the 80s? Let me take a look. They were published in this one. This is The She-Devil. Which also has a pretty excellent cover. Who did that cover? Let me find out. That cover was done by Jody Penalva. Jody Penalva did that cover. It's pretty excellent. And this is a paperback book that came out, and I want to say it was probably 83 this one came out. And I don't know if there was an earlier edition of this. There might have been. And it has a bunch of the stories that were originally published in the late 30s in Spicy Adventure Stories. Spicy Adventure Stories published the stories in this volume. And so this is how I read these stories originally. Not, to be honest, full disclosure, not the best Robert E. Howard stories ever, but they're interesting and they are kind of fun. So this is how I originally read these stories. However, the newer edition has corrected texts of these stories. As it says on the back of this volume, those who are familiar with the previously published versions of the stories presented here in Spicy Adventures are in for a surprise with the texts presented in this volume. For if Howard's agent Otis Klein and us thought that Howard's stories were perhaps too tame for publisher armor, it turned out upon examination of the surviving carbons and drafts that it was in fact the opposite. All the stories had been heavily censored when first published in Spicy Adventures, and thus in the 1983 edition. In typical fashion, Howard had gone further than the guidelines imposed, stretching the boundaries as much as possible, probably because he felt he understood what his readers wanted. This was nothing new. So yeah, this has corrected texts of those stories. Extra spicy. This has extra spice. So got to be careful with these stories. So this is awesome. I'm happy that these have shown up again in this new volume, and I will have fun reading these extra trashy stories for these for this extra trashy kind of pulp, the spicy pulps. And there's a hilarious letter that I have to read because it's fantastic. So about Robert E. Howard submitting stories to this magazine, Spicy Adventure Stories. He wrote a letter to Robert E. Howard. Robert E. Howard wrote a letter to H.P. Lovecraft. He wrote a letter to Lovecraft where he just is completely messing with Lovecraft in this letter. He knew Lovecraft would be horrified by what he has to say here. This is Robert E. Howard to H.P. Lovecraft. In my efforts to make new markets, I've been splashing the field, as Price calls it. One market I tried was Spicy Adventure, a sex magazine, to which Ed is the star contributor. I sold the first yarn I tried, but I doubt if I could make that market regularly, as it requires a deft, jaunty style foreign to my natural style. However, I'll probably try it again. Why don't you give it a whirl? You can use a pen name if you like. I did, and I think most of its contributors do. The maximum length is about 5,000 words. That sort of yarn is easy to write, if not to sell. If they reject it, you've only wasted a day or so. If they accept it, you're $50 to the good, and they pay promptly. They like good, strong plots, but the sex element is a cinch. Any man can write that part of it. Just write up one of your own sex adventures. Alter to fit the plot. That's the way I did with the yarn I sold them. So that's hilarious because he knew that H.P. Lovecraft would recoil in horror at the very idea. And he also probably knew H.P. Lovecraft had no interest in having any kind of sex adventures of any kind. So that makes it extra hilarious. And the stories in this are fun. And like I said, I've only read the versions of the stories that have appeared in here. So this is mild spicy. Extra spicy. So that should be fun. That should be fun to read. And then we get something that I have been looking forward to. This is Pirate Adventures by Robert E. Howard, which reprints his pirate stories. He did not write a lot of pirate stories. You'll find a lot of elements of pirate stories in the Conan series, like Queen of the Black Coast and some other stories. But his straight pirate stories didn't sell particularly well, so he didn't sell a lot of them. This is a fairly slim volume compared to some of the others. But they were fun, and some of these stories, 3 of them, were published before in this volume. This is Black Volmea's Vengeance by the creator of Conan. Has that great Ken Kelly cover of Black Volmea battling a snake. So yeah, I have read some of the pirate stories originally in this volume, and probably elsewhere as well. But all of the pirate stories are reprinted here in this volume, Pirate Adventures. It also has some really cool photos of Robert E. Howard and his pals goofing off, dressing like pirates, running around with swords out in Texas. You know, fun stuff. They knew how to have a good time over there in Texas. They'd fight out in front of their house with swords. It was a great time. So this is awesome. I'm really happy that they published these. All the pirate stories in one volume, including Swords of the Red Brotherhood, Black Volmea's Vengeance, A Buccaneer Speaks, The Isle of Pirates' Doom. I mean, with titles like that, of course you want to read this book. So this is awesome. 2 new books from the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press. I think the next volume they're going to print is another one I'm really looking forward to, which is The Early Adventures of Elborak, which should be a really interesting volume. So I think that's the next one that they've got coming out. And they've got a bunch of others that they should be putting out eventually, including Robert E. Howard's boxing stories. They did publish all of Robert E. Howard's boxing stories in earlier editions that are very hard to get now, as well as his westerns, all of his westerns, his humorous westerns with Breckenridge Elkins, his non-humorous westerns. Almuric was published in a volume of science fantasy stories, which I certainly hope to see reprinted. So they've done some great stuff, and they've got some excellent books coming our way, including these. These are out now. You can go out and buy them. So why don't you? There you go. Okay, guys. We'll catch you next time.